Welcome to VLGA Connect. My name is Catherine Arndt and I'm the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. I hope you enjoy today's Connect episode brought to you by the VLGA, the national broadcaster on all things local government.
And it's a big hello to you and welcome to the governance update from VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and yes, Stephen Cooper is leaving already. What did I say, Stephen?
No, it wasn't you. It's the washing machine that started beeping, so I closed the door. All right. So would you like to start again?
Yes, I'd love to start again. All right. There's one for the blooper tapes for the end of the year, John.
That one where he walked off.
Yes, it's the one where he walked off. All right, take two. And it's a big hello to you and welcome to the governance update from VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. And it wouldn't be VLGA Connect without the dulcet tones and the governance nous of Stephen Cooper. Hello to you.
Oh, hello, Chris Eddy. What a lovely introduction. And can I say thank you for your mention on the local government news roundup of this little session where you described it as the flagship, I think.
Yes. Yes, I did.
I thought it was more 6 months on a leaky boat, but anyway.
And you notice how I put it all on you. It's the flagship edition program from VLGA Connect with Stephen Cooper.
Well, our listenership are astute enough to see through that.
Anyway, speaking of the listenership and the viewership, it's nice to have you back again. We didn't completely tank last week because of the knitwear. Numbers are down a little bit though, Steve, but maybe that's because of other factors. I hope it's not because of my very bright top, because this week I've just got a plain old cardi.
Gone for sensible. Well done, Chris.
Yeah. And what are you wearing there, Steve?
Well, I was reminded this week with the sad news of the passing of Issey Miyake, who rather famously designed the Steve Jobs signature turtleneck attire. Yep. Of which apparently Steve Jobs had about 100 of them, which I think's actually pretty boring to have 100 of the same type.
Yeah.
I do something differently. I have multiple colours, Chris, but they're all woolen crew necks by an organisation whose initials are Gazman. Anyway, there you go.
You're not alone there. I've had that recommendation put to me by others. So what is it about tech giants or czars, as we might call them? Because Mark Zuckerberg's got a wardrobe full of the same stuff too, hasn't he?
Yeah, maybe they're not as creative as they make out, or they are directing their creativity to areas other than what attire should I do today? Yes. I don't know.
Now that reminds me, speaking of creativity, I believe you this week have become a published photographer. Tell us the story.
I have, Chris. Every so often at our house here, the kookaburras take a shine to a lamp that I have sitting in the room. And yesterday I was beavering away and there was a thud on the window, and I went to investigate, and there was a kookaburra sitting on the clothesline, and I took a photo of the kookaburra. And then while I still had my phone up, the kookaburra made a beeline for the window. So I've taken a photo of the flying kookaburra, as JLF might pop up now. And a friend said, in fact, multiple people said, you should submit that to a Facebook page called Crap Bird Photography.
So you did?
So two good things. I did, and they published it. It was one thing, and if I can call that one. And the other thing is I discovered that page, which is pretty hilarious.
Well, we learn a lot about the Cooper household with this, and hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at that. Well, you had an original photo which proves it was a real kookaburra, because the one where it's flying towards the window, it looks like it's a stuffed toy hanging off your clothesline, to be honest.
I would happily make a stat deck to the effect.
And you're going to kick off another debate. Do you leave the pegs on the line, or do you put them in a receptacle and bring them in out of the weather between washes? Because you clearly are in the former with all those pegs on your clothesline.
I am in the labour saving mode, Chris. I see no point of putting them into a receptacle and then picking them back out again. So no, squarely in the former camp.
Okay. Well, that went in a direction I bet you didn't think it would.
Not at all.
Well, well done. Congratulations on
Thank
being a
you.
published photographer. I'm not sure that I'll be spruiking that for too long. Steve, you just talked about the Labor saving. Let's talk about, to make this political, the other side of politics. You've been following the John Barilaro story pretty closely.
Oh, I think you can't not, Chris. So, and they're back on today, I believe, in the inquiry in the New South Wales Parliament. But the thing that struck me earlier in the week, and people will recall that this is all about John Barilaro accepting a role as the New South Wales Trade Commissioner to New York, a job that he created and a job that I guess the basis of appointment was changed while he was still a minister. And the thing that really struck me this week was the sort of cross-examination that went, Mr. Barilaro, you spoke to the Premier. Yeah, I ran into him in Martin Place and he inquired after my well-being because I hadn't been well. And I just happened to mention to the Premier of the state that I was applying for a job.
Yeah, as you do. Yeah, but now, forgive my ignorance. Martin Place, is that a shopping centre?
Oh, no, it's like a little, it's a, how would I describe it? It's just a street in Sydney.
Right. Okay.
And I think
Right.
the Channel 7 studios are in Martin Place. It's in the heart of town. It's like saying you ran into someone in Burke Street.
They're probably coming and going from interviews on 7 Sunrise or something.
Oh, look, who knows? Or hanging around there waiting to see who we bump into. The inquiry will take its course. But I was just reminded, Chris, that, and I think you and I talked about this previously, that it actually doesn't matter the circumstances under which the meeting took place. The key element is what was said and what is the position of the people that are in that conversation.
Exactly right. Good observation there, Steve. I'm sure you'll get some more observations out of that matter before it's done.
That one, and we might even segue eventually when the Sandon report's released, Chris, because I suspect there'll be a bit of that sort of thing emerging in that report, which is, I guess, the message I was trying to get across about, from time to time, councillors are approached by people with an interest in a matter, or council officers indeed.
Where is that report at as far as your latest intelligence is concerned?
Same.
So nothing's changed.
Same. Still waiting on the outcomes of the Supreme Court.
Right.
I think
and while we're in waiting mode, we're also waiting. We believe there's a likelihood of an inspectorate report coming soon into the Hepburn Rex matter, which has been getting a bit of press, particularly locally, but it's not out yet as far as I'm aware.
No.
Steve, a couple of issues that we've talked about in recent episodes, which we'd do well to just revisit briefly, I think. One being last week's conversation about councillors and standing for other levels of government with a state election coming up. We've got a number of councillors, been a few more announced this week, particularly some Greens candidates that are also current serving councillors. And we're starting to see some very different approaches to this leave of absence matter. And we've received some correspondence from a very well-read governance professional in the sector, which has shed some interesting light and raised some more questions, I thought.
And Chris Rees-Thomas was happy to be attributed, so why not? We will where we can. We received a really interesting email from Rees, which covered a whole lot of territory on that space of leaves of absence. Is that what they are? Leave of absences?
Well, he actually makes the point that they're not leaves of absence. Under the Act, a councillor can request leave from the council to be away for whatever reason, but there's nothing actually in the Act, as I understand it, and from what Rees is saying, where it's actually described as a leave of absence.
No, I think it's just a term that's snuck in. And really the important point with leave of absence is, where a councillor is away for some time, that the minutes record that leave of absence is granted to ensure that that trigger for potential departure from office isn't met.
Yes. So what for you stood out from that that bit of information? Because there are a couple of things for me that I hadn't considered, and I think Rees has even said some councils might need to change their governance rules as a result of some of this emerging practice, I guess.
I think so, Chris. It's about whether, most governance rules would be silent on a question of whether a candidate must accept their nomination. So that would be interesting if a councillor who is not present at the meeting was nominated, because the Act would appear to say that they can be, because they're not excluded, as we talked about last week. So, should the local rules contemplate that question, or the governance rules, I should say?
Yes, well, that's a question for each council and their governance rules, I guess. You've also had, I think, some conversations with Tony Rannick at Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors, about perhaps trying to get some definitive advice around what are the pathways here. What I think's happening, Steve, I'm not sure if we touched on it this last week. Some councillors, I think, are feeling some pressure to actually take the leave of absence earlier than perhaps they might have, as well as make a call on what happens to their councillor allowance, quite aside from what the legislation prescribes that they must do.
Yeah, the allowance one, I think you and I have talked about that before, Chris. I get a bit torn on that because, whilst, yes, if a councillor takes leave of absence, there's a question about should, the ratepayers be paying for that. If the debate turns into a sort of a pejorative commentary around councillor allowances generally, that gets a bit difficult. To your other point, though, around councillors taking leave of absence, I think that's just a classic case where what might be an ethical standard isn't met by the current legal standard. And I know you've had comment made to you that there is no obligation for a councillor who's standing for election to take leave of absence
earlier than nomination day, basically.
Yeah, before they put their nomination in.
Yeah.
Now, that may well be a valid view. And as you and I have talked about, the sort of ethical question is, well, when we know that the person is going to be a candidate, whenever they speak, whenever they act as a councillor, are they really just acting as a councillor, or do they have an eye for their potential candidacy?
Yes.
So that's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one, and overlay it with the timing of mayoral elections, which we touched on as well last week. And, everyone's going back to look at the timelines for when it must take place, and if there's councillors absent, or, are they making arrangements for those councillors to be present just for the purpose of either electing that mayor or nominating, standing for mayor, or voting for a mayor? That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out as well.
Yeah, and Reece made the point that, where have I got this? The Act allows 1 month for the election of the first mayor or replacement mayor, but a regularly scheduled election for years 2, 3 and 4 must occur as close to the end of the 1-year term as is reasonably practicable. That's in section 26(4). And so there are some councils where close as is reasonably practicable, you would imagine, look, the nearest scheduled meeting day, up to a week, clearly would be reasonably practicable. But there are councils out there who are delaying for almost a fortnight after. Is that reasonably practicable?
Or potentially longer. So what about the council that might be looking at, because there's councillors away perhaps, and it changes the numbers, of delaying it by a full month? Is that reasonably practicable? One would argue probably not the intent of the Act.
No, but at some point, I think it's not unreasonable, Chris. If it's only going to delay it for another week, and you've got councillors who have indicated a desire to take leave of absence, to hold off, for 2 weeks, to ensure that you've got the whole council. I mean, the principle is the councillors were elected, so why shouldn't they participate?
Yes. Look, we might be overcomplicating this, but the linking of the two might be the source of the problem as well, because what happens if you've got councillors away because they've participated in the election and the result isn't declared, and it's one of those that takes quite some time to resolve?
You've just created a Gordian knot, Chris.
Exactly. So I think it's going to be a really interesting one to watch, particularly in those councils where there are multiple councillors standing for election to state parliament. I'm aware of at least one council where there's 3 councillors that are running. And that has the potential to upset the balance in the chamber quite significantly.
Yeah, my only suggestion, Chris, would be when councils are working through the dates on this, to start from a position of principle rather than, how we think people are going to vote. Is usually a good idea, because then you've got a chance of establishing a defensible position.
I would agree with that, but the reality may be something different. As you know, it's an inherently political environment.
Is it the realpolitik of local government, Chris?
Yeah. All right. Let's. I suspect we'll come back to that, and perhaps, I know I suggested this last week, perhaps we could get Tony or someone from Hunt and Hunt to come on and give us a piece of definitive, maybe not advice, but guidance on commentary. Yes.
Informed commentary.
Informed commentary. That's good. We're not lawyers, by the way. Did we mention that? Conduct.
A listener will be happy with that advice, Chris. Thank you.
Conduct consistently in the news, not just in Victoria, of course, many examples. I noticed that the VLGA CEO, Catherine Arndt, has been out talking about the concerns the VLGA has that are being brought to the surface from some of these media reports. Catherine has been a guest on the Roundup the last couple of episodes to talk about that. Steve, I know you've spent a bit of time thinking about this, particularly in the wake of the Stonington issue, which is sitting there and going to be going on for some time.
Look, this has garnered a lot of attention, Chris, and we continue to receive feedback. And I think we probably best to just allow people to sit through and think about the commentary that they've already received. I was reminded this week, though, of a couple of things, and particularly because Melissa Scadden and I spoke last week on Melissa Scadden at Justicia and I spoke last week on the Better Disagreements, Better Teams session that we ran with a terrific and engaged group of councillors on this topic. And Melissa made the point about just the importance through the induction process of councils and councillors practicing their dispute resolution techniques, building trust with each other, being prepared to show some vulnerability, doing everything possible to positively resolve conflict in a mature way, because no matter what the intent is, once we get into those arbitration and panel processes, people get in their corners and want to defend their positions quite reasonably, and it is very hard to come back from that. That's not to say that those processes shouldn't be used, but everything that we can do to resolve issues beforehand has got to be a positive and in the public interest.
Yeah, so even intervention's not the word, is it? But just building those foundations from the outset so that they're solid and will help you get through some rough patches and avoid things getting to a point that it could be irretrievable. Yeah,
but that said, Chris, we're in a workplace and people are entitled to a safe workplace. So, Chris, I would commend anyone to have a look on the VLGA website and look at the release that we've prepared. I know a number of media outlets, Ballarat Courier, Inside Local Government, have picked up Catherine's comments. Really, we are at the phase, if a response is going to be sector-led, that people need to, process the issues so we can, we can come back in a way that's positive and productive.
Yeah, you mentioned the Ballarat Courier. They've done some interesting pieces recently that are local government focused, and that's one of them. I think it was like a full page, the politics of council type story that's well worth a read. And I'll come back to a story that's doing the rounds it's in today's Ballarat Courier, actually, about heritage and council decisions. Steve, I know you've been looking at some press coming out of South Gippsland Shire, which is giving us a bit of a snapshot of how things are sitting there after a pretty tumultuous few years.
Chris, I'm a bit torn about whether to talk about this, because the question might be asked, what on earth was I doing reading the Foster newspaper, hanging around South Gippsland? And I have to let people into one of the best kept secrets in Victoria, which is the beautiful hamlet of Sandy Point down towards Wilson's Prom.
Oh.
Possibly the best beach cricket venue in Australia, a very wide packed beach, beautiful scenery. And I went to a social event in the community hall. But while I was down there, happened to note that the council, the South Gippsland Shire's community satisfaction results had been published in the local media. And you've picked up on the sort of thing that I picked up on too, Chris.
Well, yeah, it really shows quite a significant rebuilding of trust in the council, the decision-making, the governance processes. It's come a long way in 3 years, and we know the story. You know, council was dismissed, administrators were in for some time to rebuild those governance foundations, and the newly elected council has picked it up and gone on running with it.
Yeah, isn't it funny? Because often the community satisfaction results, let's remember there's a margin for error. So from result to result, often there's not much. It will be whether there's a trend over several years, because you might expect 2 or 3% one way or the other, might be just sampling error or just a local issue that's of no particular moment. But overall council direction in 2019 going from a score of 30 to the current year going to a score of 51. Overall performance from 33 to 49, making community decisions from 35 to 48.
Yeah,
Are really powerful results, Chris.
I agree, and full marks to Karen Ellis and the team there, who've obviously and they've had the monitor assisting them as well, Prue Digby, working them with them through this process, and terrific results. Long may that continue.
I just think, actually, if we're adding plugs, I'll add one to Julie Eisenbeis and the team of administrators, because that time was used to describe to the community what a functioning council should look like.
Yes.
And that's paid off. Can I just point out to one thing, Chris, too, that in amongst all of that, there were a couple that went down. Sealed local roads has gone from 48 to 42. And for me, that's not surprising. We've had La Nina and wet conditions for 3 years. And so it is quite natural that people will say, gee, there's a few potholes in the road. Again, this is an example where you can pay attention to that, but not be completely distracted by it.
Good point. All right, well done to South Gippsland Shire. I think lots of community satisfaction results are starting to filter through from councils around the state, and we just urge everyone to have a look at their local results and make their own judgments on those. And Steve, this sort of ties in nicely to a reminder that you gave me that we should very soon be hearing about the next round of electoral representation reviews that need to be happening ahead of the 2024 elections.
Chris, I had a call from another regular listener who listens while they're in the car in their mayoral responsibilities, cruising around their municipality. And the question was asked around what do we know about electoral representation reviews? And at the time I had to say, oh, not much. I hadn't thought about it. But when I did some digging, I was reminded that there were some amendments in the 2020 Act, and that under the new Act, the minister will be appointing a panel to conduct those electoral representation reviews. The panel will include representation from the VEC, and you would imagine will receive support from the VEC in that process. Equally, we've got a new minister. We've got to get through a state election. I'd be sort of expecting, and the advice I've had is it's pretty unlikely that anything will occur in terms of detail during 2022, and that process will kick off in the new year, and that when there is a page on the Local Government Victoria website, we can pop the link on the show notes, and as changes occur, that page will be updated.
I think you're right. I'd be very surprised to see anything happen this year, but next year I'd say that's going to have to happen in earnest for it all to be completed ahead of the next cycle of elections.
Absolutely. And again, can we think about it from a representation, what's best from the municipality point of view, not the, and there are some really weighty issues around, I guess, the accessibility for office that single member wards provide versus, the scale and the other benefits attached to either for the country councils, multi-member or unsubdivided.
Yeah, so single member wards has become the default position, basically, hasn't it?
That's right.
And I think it's up to councils, particularly the rurals, to argue a case for why they shouldn't have single member wards. That's pretty much
That's
how
it.
it's written, isn't it?
Yeah.
So just to remind people, last time prior to the 2020 elections, there were 8 councils that moved to single member wards, mostly Metro, Bayside, Cardinia, Darebin, Greater Dandenong, Kingston, Manningham, Maroondah and Whitehorse. Actually, all Metro if you count Cardinia as being interface or fringe. Yeah. And Swan Hill and Mansfield moved to unsubdivided structures under that process, which shows you it's not necessarily going to be single member ward, but we'll wait for the process to run its course, Steve.
Exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of processes, the remuneration review has happened. We talked about it earlier in the year. The tribunal made its first determination and programmed out increases over the next couple of years for councillors, mayors, deputy mayors. There's an interesting piece of research that's come out, and I'm going to be talking to the author of this for a special episode of the Roundup very soon, about the costs of councillor remuneration not being adequate.
Chris, that is that report. I don't know. I'm mixing my metaphors here. It's music to my ears. We at the VLGA argued to the review that we think that councillor remuneration should be adequate. There is certainly a PR piece, really alerting the community to actually the complexity of the role of councillor, and this report points to some of the implications for not paying a significant or a material amount.
What I like about this, Steve, it's not Victorian focused, so it's giving us another perspective from, I think, mostly New South Wales. I've got to get into the detail yet, but it's been written by some people from ANU and Macquarie University. So it's rooted in evidence, and it makes some really interesting comments about the impact on the well-being of councillors and communities, the diversity and the quality of representation from inadequate councillor remuneration. So stay tuned. We'll be talking a lot more about that in the coming weeks.
And the report, it's not one-sided. It does describe the flip side of, what the consequences might be of paying too much. But let's just say that's a short chapter.
Yep. Okay. All right. Steve, I mentioned the Ballarat Courier earlier. Let's just whip through a few stories that are doing the rounds news-wise. This one caught my eye, and I had a good read of this morning. A decision by Ballarat Council to vote against recommendation and heritage advice about a property with historic Chinese characteristics in Canadian. 4 councillors voted against the recommendation and the advice, which the newspaper suggesting will probably lead to the demolition of that house, which is interesting to just read about the challenges councils have in balancing these types of concerns. And in this case, the councillors are saying, they're siding with the property owners, not the heritage considerations.
And Chris, I wouldn't weigh into the detail except to say this is an incredibly fraught ethical issue around, right to develop versus heritage controls. What are the types of property and building or built form over which heritage controls ought to be provided? And it's been put to me previously that it's not only buildings that, in Australia's context, were constructed in years that start with 1 and 8, that in fact some quite modern buildings might have a need for heritage control. The council, there were 2 councillors absent, and the majority of councillors on the day said no, and presumably they get to do that.
Well, yes, they do, and there's quite a bit of detail there in the story if you want to seek that out from the Ballarat Courier. More councils in the news this week around the delivery of aged care services and the number of councils that are exiting. I've seen 2 different numbers. The Age is saying 23 councils have exited, the ABC saying 28. I'm not sure which one's right, to be honest. But it's focused a bit on what's happening in Borondara and Mornington Peninsula Shire, where allegedly through these stories, because the councils have exited the provision of those in-home services, the private providers are having trouble finding staff, which is not an isolated problem,
No.
which is leading to concerns about the provision of those services for elderly, for people in need.
That's a good way to finish that, Chris, because that's the most important element of this are some of our most vulnerable citizens receiving the care that they need. It's been interesting over the week watching the media shift, because I know when I saw The Age and the ABC pick it up early, the tenor of the story was, how dare local government get out of this service? It's a cost issue, they're not caring, etc., etc. And that has now moved. And props to MAV President David Clark, who I heard interviewed on ABC Radio yesterday morning, who made the case quite eloquently and convincingly that the issue relates to the federal shift in the funding model, that we've gone from a payment to councils for a standardised service to a market-driven model where providers really need to respond to individual wants and needs, and that local government at a simple level just doesn't have the scale to have that kind of flexibility. We're at our best where we can design a service, bring in the resources and just roll it out. So, there is that element of it. There is also the element that, in a rate capping environment, it's, with the funding model set up the way it is pretty hard for local governments economically to stay in that service.
It is, and some are advising caution. We've had a change of government and a change of political persuasion at the federal level, and I think they're sort of hanging on pretty tenuously to the idea that something might change there. I'm not saying it won't, but it's well advanced, the changes that were introduced by the previous government. And the Age story points out that Yarra, Port Phillip and Stonington, at least, are three that are due to make decisions around their delivery of these services in the near future. Got to say, though, Steve, not all councils are exiting, and some are actually doubling down. And I think, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, I think Kingston's one that has actually said we're in this for the long haul. And another council that I have something to do with is seriously considering doubling down as well, but gathering, as these other councils are, gathering information to make an informed decision in the very near future.
Yeah, a couple of things out of that, Chris. My recollection is, and I stand corrected, that both NDIS and My Aged Care had their genesis during the former Labor government. So I wouldn't necessarily be relying on thinking that it's it's a partisan issue. But circumstances change and governments can change their minds. I think you're right. In fact, I know you're right, that a number of councils have been really reluctant to exit these sorts of services because there isn't confidence. Until there is confidence, and this was pre-COVID, in the capacity of the market to deliver services to the standard that councils were, formally able to provide. And the other one I just throw in as a bit of a political piece is, can people think about this when they, rail against rate increases, that in fact rates do go to services that support the community?
Steve, I think with our audience, you're largely talking to the converted there, but you never know. Someone might blunder their way into our YouTube channel and hear that and change their whole thinking about how local councils operate.
Thank you to that person if they're still with us, Chris.
Indeed. They were just passing by, I think. Bye. A few other items of note before we wrap up. Some of these will be quick. This was interesting, Steve. There's a councillor at Mitchellshire who's actually suing the council and will be absent from meetings. This is over some damage caused to a horse transport vehicle by a tree in Kilmore East last year, at least according to the North Central Review.
The tree overhung the road, Chris, by an amount that was less than the council's policy for clearing trees over roads, and the vehicle drove into the tree and apparently caused $90,000 worth of damage, which is not insignificant. So it will be a question of, I guess, what's the responsibility of the driver no matter what to avoid hazards versus what's the responsibility of the council to comply with its own policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, the action is against the insurer, but of course it's the council's insurer. Therefore, the way this has been presented in the media is councillor sues it's her own council.
As our listeners know, Chris, councils subrogate their rights to the insurer when there's a claim.
Yep. All right. So I'll pop the link to if anyone wants to have a look at that a little bit more closely. Want to say hello and well done and all the best to Greg Burgoyne, the CEO at Glenelg Shire. This one nearly slipped under the radar. In fact, I don't think there's been a formal announcement from the council about this. I picked it up through some media reports, Steve. Greg Burgoyne has given notice at Glenelg and will finish probably early next year. It's going to be one of those orderly transitions where he'll stay on until they have a replacement.
An orderly transition, Chris, that actually should catch on.
It should. We'd like to see more of that, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
Congratulations to Ali Wasty, the CEO at Bass Coast Shire, who I know is a regular listener to this program because she told me. I bumped into her last night at the MAV Technology Awards in town. Ali has been appointed as the inaugural chair of Alpine Resorts Victoria. This is the new entity, significant entity that's taking over from the 4 Alpine Resort Management Boards and the Alpine Resorts Coordinating Council. Full disclosure, I was on that for 4 years up until yesterday. We just had our last meeting, and we're very, very happy to see this structural change taking place, and it will be in good hands with Ali at the helm of ARV.
Yeah, congratulations to Ali. That is a significant appointment, Chris.
It is, and they've got some fun challenges ahead, let me tell you. It's a really interesting space to be involved in, and very rewarding too, I have to say. This one caught my eye this morning, Steve, out of Sydney, out of New South Wales. The mayor at Hawkesbury City Council resigned yesterday and is stepping down as the mayor, is going to stay on as a councillor, so they'll need to appoint a new mayor in the next couple of weeks. But the backstory to this is interesting and concerning. Patrick Connolly and his family were recently victims of a violent home invasion. And this has had, as you can imagine, well, I can't imagine actually, this has had significant impacts on their lives. And he's said he needs to take a step back and focus on family and can't do that mayoral role justice anymore. So we wish him well, but that's a terrible thing to have to deal with.
It's dreadfully concerning, Chris, and we don't know the circumstances of that, but I mean, well done for putting family first.
Yeah. And this one caught my eye apropos of a conversation we had after the last global panel, Steve, where one of the UK CEOs said we need to learn more from us in Australia about how we deal with bushfire risk, because they're just starting to grapple with the consequences of these heat waves that are new and unprecedented in the UK. And the University of Manchester has just released some information which really ups the ante on wildfire risk in the UK. Who would have thought we'd be talking about bushfires, wildfires raging across the United Kingdom? But here we are.
At a time where, as we touched on before, Chris, we've had La Nina in Australia for 3 years. So it really points to the importance of investment in emergency management, preparation and mitigation for all types of natural disasters.
Yeah. And yeah. I suspect there'll be a lot of conversations happening between the two different hemispheres around those things as they come to grips with this new unprecedented risk over there. And we wish them well in dealing with that, of course. Pretty hot there as we speak, I believe, Steve.
Yeah, actually, we can start and end on Facebook, Chris. I've got a friend who's over in the UK at the moment who took some lovely photos from the Cotswolds, yes. And basically said if it wasn't for the scenery, you'd think you were in Australia, the way the weather is at the moment.
Well, I don't know if that friend is Connor O'Malley. I suspect it's not, who's an acquaintance of mine who posted this morning on LinkedIn a little video piece. He's in North Yorkshire visiting his parents, and it was so dry. He was out for a morning walk. The landscape around him was so dry. I didn't realise until he said that he was actually in the UK. Extraordinary. And I know someone else who's in Sicily at the moment and told me yesterday it was 37 degrees.
Ooh, that would be a hot 37, Chris.
Yeah, I reckon. All right, Steve, anything else before we let the good folk go and do something more meaningful and constructive with their day?
Chris, the good folk will be pleased to know, I think we're done.
Well, there you go. You've heard it first right here. We're done. But we will be back next week, we hope. And we're working on some terrific, I hope they'll be terrific, I'm sure they will be, new offerings from VLGA Connect as we head into state election season. So stay tuned for more on that. You have a good week, Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Same to you.
And we'll talk soon. That's Steve Cooper. That's been VLGA Connect Governance Update. Just left now for me to say thank you to Tony Ranick and the team at Hunt and Hunt Lawyers for sponsoring the Governance Update, as they've done now for quite some time, and we're extremely appreciative. We'll see you again very soon on VLGA Connect.